Sunday, December 9th, 2007. A young man equipped with over 1,000 rounds of ammo set out on a killing spree that would target Christians in Arvada and Colorado Springs, Colorado, ultimately claiming the lives of 4 victims. Gain a glimpse into what a security operator's family experiences in the midst of such an attack. As a defender in your place of worship, this account and the others that will follow in this new series of interviews will help you and your family be ready, willing, and able.
Hi, I am Shanna Honeycutt with the Faith-Based Security Network. Today I have 2 very special guests, Deana Chinn, this is Carl Chinn's wife, and Kara Paulus, his daughter, so my mom and sister. And this will be the first time that they are speaking publicly about the attack at New Life Church. They've been behind the scenes. Carl Chinn is very public with it and has created the Faith-Based Security Network out of it. But at our conferences, so many times we hear the feedback from attendees. They want to know how it affected the security team's wife and children. So they want to see, because they want to know how to respond for their own family. I mean, this is why we do what we do. Introduce yourself and tell them what you wish that you had known before this incident.
So I'm Kara Paulus. I am Carl's youngest child. One thing Dad did really well is he made it an ongoing conversation. So I was very aware of what he did. I was aware of who he was looking for. That morning, Matthew Murray had already gone to the YWAM base, and Dad knew about that. And I mean, this was our living room conversation over coffee before we went to church. He had the computer in front of him and was telling me about it. So I had awareness in the back of my head, which I do think helped in the long run. I knew I could talk to Dad about anything.
I totally agree with Kara because we always talked about everything. As a matter of fact, that morning I had turned the news on and heard that about the YWAM shooting. And I just remember Dad immediately, he was sitting in his recliner, flipping his feet down on that and getting up and starting to make a phone call to get us on alert at the church. So, I thought at that time, well, that's in another place. That's a long ways off. So I thought it was a little bit
Far-fetched, maybe?
I just didn't know that it needed to be considered that much. And, but, that was what he lived in. So, and which ended up turning out very well, that they were paying attention that day. So listen to your men. I really think they have that ability to sense that danger more when they're in that space. I think they do pay attention to things so much more than we do. So and just support them. Sometimes it's hard when they're always out and not sitting with you in church, and but they are doing something so important, especially nowadays.
You guys, I like that you both brought up, because that's my memory too, of watching Dad every morning, either at the kitchen table or in the recliner, going through reports and stories about deadly attacks at faith-based organizations. And he'd always be the bearer of bad news. So he always had some kind of story to tell us in the morning. But you both watched him for years before the attack on our church. You watched him go through those and try to raise awareness and track these deadly force incidents. So, I mean, it was clearly God-led, God-directed.
Of course, the New Life thing wasn't the first thing with that happened with him. You know, he was in the hostage situation at Focus on the Family. So we had already kind of been through something very similar. But that's what first got his attention on, you know, starting to study and research and see what, you know, how often is this happening? Um, and I mean, that got into him. He was just driven then. And of course, then you can imagine after a second incident was involved in, um, very much that he was called to that. You know, God was getting his attention.
But Kara, she had just returned from a mission trip with Youth with a Mission. It wasn't at the same place that was attacked that morning, but a different Youth with a Mission was attacked that morning. The person that headed that up had an office there at New Life Church, so there was a connection there. But there was a very deep connection for Kara, who had just returned from that trip. And I was also wondering, if Dad was not on the security team, would have you guys been there at the time of the shooting? Kara, I'll let you talk about YWAM and how this impacted you as a 19-year-old kid just returning from all of that.
Yeah. To answer the last question first, no, we would not have been there. And we can get to that when we tell the whole story. But I had returned from YWAM about 6 months prior. So, you know, I remember that morning hearing the news and it feeling very personal, even though that wasn't the base that I had been at. But yeah, it felt personal. But also I had been so deep in prayer throughout that whole process that I was just taking things to the Lord immediately. I wasn't gonna not go to church. I was gonna keep taking things to the Lord. Um, so that's what I did. It was like there was nothing I could do. I trusted Dad to be looking. I trusted the whole security team. I knew a few of them. I felt pretty secure.
Was it hard to return to church for you, Mom?
No, we actually went the Wednesday night after the shooting on Sunday. And, you know, we had a big worship time together. That's when we sang We Will Overcome. I think that's the first time that song had been sung. I think one of our guys had written that at church, and it was powerful. Now I remember going in and you hear things, you hear noises, you notice doors opening and shutting. After something like that, you're much more aware. It seemed popping or something. There was a loud noise.
There were loud noises for months after that. So, because you
There's
do get
so much.
you get hyper attuned to everything. What I remember, because I also worked at New Life, so that was another reason. I think that was good because I had to go in every night. I worked 4 to midnight. So I was there for all of the goings on, and I remember the youth meeting right after the shooting. They had balloons, and they started popping balloons. Um, it was awful. I mean, and because the church was so empty, most of the people I interacted with were not there. Like, praise the Lord that the church was that empty. But
And she says it was empty because the killer actually waited until the marked police car had left the parking lot. So he got there and he waited to carry out his attack until we assume he felt like it would be more successful. He didn't want to face an armed defender. He did face an armed defender. It was the first church attack that was stopped by an intentional security team, but the church had released at that point. There were people there doing other things. There is King's Seminary, and families were still there, but it wasn't. It was after the third service had already gone home or were going home.
That Wednesday night when everyone came back together, we had that worship service. There were probably 5,000 people there. The whole sanctuary was full, and I know that there were people standing, and for all of us to be singing to the Lord together was just amazing. And I think that in itself, going back so quickly, was healing.
It was healing. Yeah, even for me, I was not there that Sunday morning. I was away at a wedding in Kansas, and I got a phone call that somebody opened fire during worship, and we got in the vehicle and came home immediately. And it was me not being there. It was horrible. It changed the way that I saw things. But I remember that Wednesday too. It was good. So.
Yeah, I could see that in you when you got back home. So it very much did something in you being away.
Yeah. I'm glad I wasn't there. I had 3 little kids.
Yes.
Yeah. But you guys talking about balloons popping and the noises that you're hearing. One of the training things that I hear often is these trainers want to come in and set off gunfire in the building, or something that sounds like gunfire in the building, because there's a normalcy bias. You hear so many of these stories, you hear the gunfire and you make it something normal, like balloons popping. You make it something in your mind that is normal. What did you guys think when you heard the gunfire? Did you recognize it as gunfire?
I felt like I immediately did, which
Me too.
It was so loud, so much. It sounded like an automatic. As far as what I would, because it was so repetitive, but that could have been echoing. I don't know. But
your mind, possibly with you guys being so close to Carl Chinn, your mind knew what it was when you heard it.
Recognize that sound, but that was building. That's a different sound.
It is a different sound.
Yeah.
So, and I know that Kara, you've talked about what you imagine, how you imagined you would react, and how you really did react. And part of that is training too. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So because I had grown up hearing these stories from Dad, I would go through scenarios in my mind and think about what I would do given the situation, especially once I started working at New Life. And even that morning, I was upstairs at the office buildings, and you could kind of look down into the hallway a little bit, and I had pictured a man walking down through there in a trench coat. So I would have these pictures, and I would go through and almost kind of fantasize about what I would do in those situations. And like with so many things, when you're young and dumb, I was the hero, or at least I was doing something useful. I had keys to every place in that building. I always thought that, well, I could gather people up and get them safe. I could get them to the basement. When I heard those shots, and I do think part of it was that Mom and I were both primed to know what that sound was. The fear that overtook me was something I had never experienced. I wrote in my journal later, I was making sounds I didn't know I could make, I was hyperventilating is what it was this this sound coming out of me that I could not control on my own. I froze. I know that mom grabbed me and got me down, but after that, I would tell people I knew I'd always heard about fight or flight, and I would say, "But I guess I'm really dumb because I freeze." I didn't know then that freeze is an actual common response. I thought it was just me, but I froze. I absolutely it was paralysis. If mom hadn't been moving me, I would have stayed glued to my seat.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Go ahead.
you froze, but when I got you down under me, because we were facing each other, so your head was kind of at my chest, stomach area.
Mhm. Face down.
I just will never forget your little hands coming up over. You were bringing your hands up over my head.
Yeah.
You were trying to protect me with that. It was just the sweetest thing.
Well, when you grabbed me, it was like it got me out of my stupor a little bit.
And one of the things that makes me think, I hear people say, and I know it's true, that courage is contagious. So if you come in and you do the courageous thing, it will catch on and other people start doing it. So mom's courage to shield you was contagious right back to you. So I love.
Absolutely.
I remember feeling just this cold feeling coming over my back. It felt so exposed,
Mhm.
so weird what your body does. My back, because I was, leaning over, I felt very exposed. And I told, I don't know if I said it out loud. Kara and I have talked about this before, but I heard we've got to get out of here.
Yeah, and in my memory, she said that, and I don't know that in my memory also, I was hearing people scream. So,
Oh,
there was terror in the building, whether it
yes.
was shots being fired or screaming, there was terror in the building is the best way to describe it. But
I have one more question before we get into just your story from your perspective. We've all heard Carl Chinn's perspective, but we really want to hear the events and your perspective of it. I, we're seeing attacks happen more and more often. We're hearing about them in the news, and the Bible says that God comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any kind of affliction through the comfort we ourselves receive from God. For just as the sufferings of Christ overflow to us, so also through Christ our comfort overflows. And I know you two so well, and I know that you have been comforted through this. So is there something that you can say to those that have been through it recently, that you think could be, that was something that was said to you, something that you experienced that brought you healing?
I don't know if you even know this, but in the Mormon Tabernacle attack, um, we know a family that I don't know if he is still in the hospital from smoke inhalation or not, but, didn't know them extremely well, but it does make it more personal, where I think they have 5 children.
Wow.
Um, so thinking if I were to actually speak to her right now, one thing is I would just be quiet and let her tell her story as many times as she needed to. Um, but also just know that God and his timing are incredibly powerful. God uses time. Sometimes it takes more time than we want it to for things to heal, but God uses it and he's faithful in it. So you just hang on to him and the time will pass. And it will get better.
I can't really say that any better. I feel like talking about it is what helped. I had Kara. We experienced pretty much the same thing, and so we talked about it a lot. And of course, with that whole different experience, but just letting them talk. I loved what she said. Let them tell their story. I think being able to that does heal, and of course, your relationship with the Lord. Just leaning into Him. Um, I felt there were two girls there that were killed, so that was really hard. Um, uh, I felt so bad for them. My heart broke for them, but I was so grateful that Kara was okay. So that was a weird feeling to know the kind of pain that they must have been through that I can't imagine. Um,
And we can always look at somebody else that had it so much worse and use that as a reason to not share and not go through that grieving process, because you didn't experience the pain that you feared the most. I know Kara had talked about before, people not asking her, like she wished more people would ask her how she was doing, because she needed to talk and process it. So yeah, just check on those people that you know. Ask them how they're doing.